Okay, so this afternoon we are going to be looking at the run-on sentences and comma splices, and they are two very, very similar things, okay? And like I mentioned before I started recording, this is the sheet that you hopefully will have in front of you, and you can kind of follow along as we are going through the answers to the questions. Now, with what we are doing this afternoon, there are going to be several correct answers. So what I am putting on my sheet could possibly be slightly different to what you are putting on your sheet. And hopefully that will become clearer as to why there are several answers as we explain what the run-on sentences are and what comma splices are. Okay, so what we are speaking about today is essentially incorrect punctuation of sentences. And when we are talking today, there are a few words that we are using. I'm hoping that you will be familiar with some of these words. So we are going to be speaking about your simple sentences and independent clauses. Independent clauses, simple sentences, they will include a subject and a verb. Okay. We will also be talking about run-on sentences and comma splices. And in order to fix those, we will be using the words conjunctions, semicolons, and commas. Okay. And hopefully you will be able to use these when you're doing your writing. So when we talk about simple sentences, we are speaking about one independent clause, okay? At school, you will probably call it a main clause as well. And the independent clause, or the main clause, it is a group of words that work on their own to give the reader one idea, okay? Now, simple sentences or main clauses, independent clauses, they must contain a subject and it must contain the verb. And your simple sentence can be split into two bits. You've got the part of it that is related to the subject and the part of it that we call the predicate that is linked to the verb, okay? But because the word predicate might be new to some of you, we will stick with the word verb, okay? And when we are talking about run-on sentences, they are one way that is incorrectly punctuating your sentences, because a run-on sentence is when you don't have any punctuation or a conjunction between your main clause and either the subordinate clause or your independent clauses. And we will speak more about the subordinate part of it later on. But usually, when you have two main clauses, you would link them with a coordinating conjunction so that they form a compound sentence. And that would be the grammatically correct way of having your two main clauses together. Okay. Now, when we are talking about a comma splice, it is another form of the run-on sentence. And the comma splice is when you have your two independent clauses and they are linked with a comma rather than a coordinating conjunction in there. Okay? So if you have, again, two independent clauses, you need to have that coordinating conjunction to make a compound sentence. Now, some of you may think that run-on sentences are sentences that are really, really long. This isn't always the case. Some of your run-on sentences could be incredibly short. It could just be the fact that I was scared, I screamed. that would be a run-on sentence because I was scared is one main clause. I screamed is a separate main clause. And to link them together, I need to put some sort of conjunction in between them. So I was scared, so I screamed, or I was scared and I screamed. I need to have that conjunction to link those two main clauses in a sentence. Now, having a look at these sentences here, I have got my first sentence is a run-on sentence, and it is a run-on sentence because I have got the flowers are beautiful. That is one main clause. The flowers are the subject, are is the verb, and the beautiful is the complement that completes the sentence. Then my second main clause here, they brighten the room. They is the subject because it is talking about the flowers. Brighten is what they're doing. The room is obviously where they are. Now, this is a run-on sentence because there is no conjunction between them. So you could have an and in there. Okay. The next one is a slightly different mistake. It's called a comma splice. And you've got your first main clause here about the sea. And then I have linked it to my next main clause about the grass, but I have used a comma instead of another method of linking the two sentences. The third one, I can spot the comma, so it must be a comma splice. So this part here, today we are going to York, is my main clause, and I am very excited is a second main clause. And then the final one, the run-on sentence, it is harder to spot. I need to look for it and I need to spot my main clauses. And I am looking here and I can see my first main clause. My favourite band is in town is the first main clause. The second main clause, they are performing today. And it doesn't make sense without the extra punctuation or conjunction in the middle of it. Okay, so now that we know what those errors are, we need to be able to correct them. And this is where I said there are several correct ways of doing this. Okay, so let me just get rid of those drawings. And this is why some of your answers later on in the session might be slightly different to my answers. So you could correct them by splitting them into two main clauses, two simple sentences. So take out the comma and put in a full stop. Or if there isn't a comma there, you need to put a full stop between the two main clauses. The next way of doing it is adding a coordinating conjunction. So if you want to make a contrast between your ideas, you would use this method. So if you're expressing an alternative, if you're clarifying the orders of ideas, or if you are showing relationships between ideas, add a coordinating conjunction. And remember, your coordinating conjunctions, they are the fanboys conjunctions. The other way that you could correct these types of sentences, add in a semicolon. Okay, so if you've got a run-on sentence, put a semicolon between the two main clauses. If you have the comma splice, use a semicolon instead of the comma. And you would only do this if you are showing a close relationship between the two ideas. The other way that you can change them is by using a subordinating conjunction. So you could turn one of the main clauses into a subordinate clause. And you would do this if one of the main clauses adds extra information to the other main clause. And the final way of correcting this is again using a semicolon, but have your semicolon followed by what we call a conjunctive adverb. And the conjunctive adverbs, they are different to coordinating conjunctions. And I will send this bit through to you afterwards. This screen here are your conjunctive adverbs. So you would use your semicolons in association with those adverbs, okay? And it's not always appropriate to. So what you will need to do, you will need to think about, am I just adding some more detail and clarifying the ideas? I would then use a coordinating conjunction. If my two ideas are clearly linked, have my semicolon. If they're not quite the same, but they are quite close, I might have the semicolon and the conjunctive adverb. Or if you're adding additional information, consider changing part of the sentence into a subordinate clause. So this part here is the very top part of your sheet. And we're starting with the easier to spot type of sentences. So in this sentence, you have your commas, okay? So we're looking at the comma splices first of all. And in my first one, I have got my main clause here, I love to cook. And my second main clause, I'm not very good. And I think that the best way to link those two ideas would be with a conjunction. And I'm thinking my fanboys conjunction is going to work with this. And I think the but would make most sense. So I love to cook, but I'm not very good. So I can put but in there. And like I mentioned earlier, you may have different answers, and it is acceptable for you to have different answers with this activity because there are different ways of changing the comma splice, okay? So my next one, the teacher was very angry. This is the first main clause here. And then the second main clause, the children weren't listening. Now, there are two different ways that I could change this. I could have a subordinate clause. So the children weren't listening is the reason that the teacher was angry. So I could say the teacher was angry because the children weren't listening. Or because the relationship between the two main clauses is very similar, I could have a semicolon in there. But I think I would probably go with a because. And for both of these, for this one here, I don't need the comma, okay? With the but, I need the comma before it because I have a subject in each of the main clauses. So you would need the comma and the but, okay? Now, the next one, I'm thinking it probably won't make sense if I add a conjunction. So my first main clause here, the weather was awful. My second main clause is telling me more about the weather. It rained all day. So what I would do in this case, I would add here, I would change my comma for semicolons because it is showing the clear relationship between the weather and it raining. Now, looking at the next one about Larry, I think I'm going to do something a little bit different here. And I think Larry went to New York is the main clause. he attended a very important meeting is a main clause. Now, I think I'm going to turn that very first main clause into a subordinate clause. And I think that I could probably do that by using a when. So if I put when Larry went to New York, he attended a very important meeting, I'm still going to need my comma because I've now got a subordinate clause at the beginning of the sentence. Okay, and this final one with my comma splices, again, there's a couple of ways that you could tackle this. So you could have this main clause here, and it's linked quite closely to the polar bears. So you could have in here your semicolons, or you might want to have a comma and then a conjunction, and maybe and he saw polar bears. So with that particular sentence, there are a couple of different ways of doing that. Okay, so comma splices, they are slightly easier to spot because you have the comma in between the two main clauses. And a comma splice is also a type of run-on sentence. The one that is harder to spot is the next one that we are looking at. The run-on sentence here where there is no punctuation. So what I need to do in order to work this out, I need to look for my subjects and my verbs so that I can work out where my main clause finishes. And I think here I've got all of the parents came to the school play, they all enjoyed it. So this part here, they came to the school play, and I have got the subject is parents, came is the verb, and then my second main clause that I have, they all enjoyed it. They is the subject, enjoyed is my verb. So I've spotted my two main clauses. So now I can work out how should I correct it. And I think in this situation, the best way to correct this would be just to split them into two simple sentences. So I would put here a full stop, and then I would have they starting with a capital letter. So in that case, just a full stop would work. Now, the next one, I can't go to sleep, it's too light outside. I need to spot my clauses. So my first main clause, I think I've got it. I can't get to sleep. So this bit here is my first main clause. My second main clause, it's too light outside. And looking at that, I've got the subject is I, the verb is the can't get, it links together, and then to sleep is what I'm not able to do. Now, it is the subject there, is my verb, too light outside is what it is. Now, in terms of how I am going to punctuate that, it is possible that I could use a semicolon, but the second part is really the reason that I can't get to sleep. So I would be tempted in this to have a because. And remember, the conjunction because is used for given reasons. So I can't get to sleep because it is too light outside. You could also use since. I can't get to sleep since it is too light outside. They are the conjunctions that help you to give reasons. And I think that would work better than a semicolon in that case. Now the next one, let's have a look. Where does the main clause end? Right, I think I've spotted it. It's about my mum. My mum visits the museum. She spends hours looking. So I think my mum visits the museum is my first main clause. And my second main clause, she spends hours looking at the exhibits. So this part here is the second main clause. And I think what I am going to do with this is I'm going to turn the first part into a subordinate clause. So instead of using semicolons, I am going to put when my mum visits the museum. So add the when there. And then because the first part has now become a subordinate clause, I need to add extra punctuation. And what I need to add is a comma after the main clause there. So I should have when my mum visits the museum, comma, she spends hours looking at the exhibits. So I've split the subordinate clause from the main clause. Okay, so moving on to Simon. Simon wants to be an astronaut. He loves space. So my main clause, I can see where it finishes. Simon wants to be an astronaut is the first part. He loves space is my second main clause. And I think the logical way of splitting this would be to put the semicolons in there because it's giving me more information about why Simon wants to be the astronaut. So I would put in this one the semicolons. It is possible that you could put a conjunction in there because you could say Simon wants to be an astronaut and he loves space if you're linking the ideas, or you could turn the final bit into a subordinate clause. So Simon wants to be an astronaut as he loves space. So either of those options would work. Okay. Now, the final one, you cannot go to the party, you have not completed your homework. Right, so I've spotted my main clauses. My first main clause, you can't go to the party. The second main clause, you haven't completed your homework. So I have got my subject is you. Cannot go is your complete verb chain because you've got the modal verbs in there as well. Okay. In my second main clause, you is still the subject. Haven't completed is your verb chain because you've got, again, the modal verbs, you have not, and then completed is your main verb. Now, there's two ways that you could do this. I don't think the semicolons would work as well, but it's possible that you could use them. I guess you could split it into two complete sentences. So you cannot go to the party, full stop. You haven't completed your homework, full stop. But I think the best way to do it is turn the final main clause into a subordinate clause. And I think this time I'm going to use since. So you cannot go to the party since you haven't completed your homework. Again, I could have used because. So I've chosen a conjunction that fits with the reason part of it. Now, the last part of what we're going to do today is a mixture of run-on sentences and comma splices. So the first one here, let me have a look. Is it a comma splice? Is it a run-on sentence? So Ali went to London at the weekend. It's got a comma in it. So this one here, it is a comma splice there. And now we need to fix it. So let me have a look. I have got my main clause here. Ali is my subject. went is the verb. And then my second main clause, let me see what it is doing. She enjoyed visiting her family. So it's kind of telling me a bit more about what she is doing. So in this case, I think I would have a comma and an and I'm going to make it into a compound sentence. So Ellie went to London this weekend and she enjoyed visiting her family. So it links. You could also have your semicolons there because they are quite closely related. Now, my next one, Matt had studied all week for his maths test, but there's no punctuation in it at all. So this must be a run-on sentence there. So now we need to fix it and we need to look where are the main clauses. So the first one, it's about Matt. So let me just find it. Matt had studied all week for his maths test, is the first bit. And my second main clause, he will receive the highest mark, hopefully. So that is my second main clause. Now, I think with this, I've got Matt as my subject, had studied is my verb chain, he again is the subject, and will receive is the verb chain. And I think I am going to use something that we haven't used yet. I think I'm going to put a semicolon and I'm going to use a conjunctive adverb in there. And I think what I will do is I will put undoubtedly he will receive the highest mark. So I need my semicolon and undoubtedly, and I'll just put it at the top there. So Matt has studied all week for his maths test. Undoubtedly, he will receive the highest mark. So I've used the conjunctive adverb in that sense. Okay. The next one, it says, right, so I've spotted a comma in it. So it must be, it's a comma splice. And looking here, I can spot that winter is my favourite season is my first main clause. I love playing in the snow is the second main clause. And I think I could have an and I love playing in the snow. But I think because they are quite closely related, I'm going to go for the semicolons this time. So I'm just going to have a semicolon between the two main clauses. Now, the final one here, the intelligent woman studied hard, her friend, but I've not got any punctuation, so I can tell straight away that this is a run-on sentence. And now I need to think about where are my clauses. So looking at the first part, the intelligent woman studied hard. So that is my first main clause. My second main clause, her friend read a book. Now, I think I could do one of two things. I could do the intelligent woman studied hard and her friend read a book, or I could turn it into a subordinate clause and I could say, the intelligent woman studied hard whilst her friend read a book. And I think that probably makes the most sense. So I will have a whilst in there, whilst her friend read the book. Okay, so in this bit we have spotted comma splices, we've spotted the run-on sentences, we have identified the main clauses, and we have split them so that they are no longer grammatically incorrect. Because if you are writing sentences that run on or that have commas to link main clauses, grammatically it isn't correct. You need to make sure that you are either making them into a compound sentence by adding one of the fanboys conjunctions, or make them into a complex sentence by turning one of the main clauses into a subordinate clause. Now let me get rid of that, and I'm just going to stop the recording.